Hello, and welcome to a special edition of the Am Writing podcast, the Working Bookshelf, aka Am Reading about writing. I am KJ Dell'Antonia, New York Times bestselling author of The Chicken Sisters and How to Be a Happier Parent, and also a former editor at the Times.
And I'm Jennie Nash, author, book coach, entrepreneur, and creator of the book coach certification program at Author Accelerator.
In every episode of this series, Jennie and I will discuss at least a pair, because we're diverging a little bit today, of popular books on writing focusing on a specific topic like creativity, structure, productivity, or characterization.
We'll tell you why these books are our favorite, then engage in heated debate over which is better, except that we're not doing that in this particular episode because we have three books that are so good we don't want to put them in competition with each other.
Although we may, there may be some heated debate. We might pull some off. Okay. The result, though, either way, will be our usual discussion of the topic itself, and followed by actionable, inspirational advice that will help you get your work done, whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned pro.
So today we're talking about writing while white.
Yeah. And we debated how to topic this because some of the books that we talk about call it, writing the other, for example. But, if you, I guess that could be writing the other, but I think the other piece of that as well, we assume that not all of you out there are also white. So, your other and my other may not be the same other.
Which is in fact the point. That is in fact the point, right? So we're talking about Writing the Other by Nisi Shawl and Cynthia Ward.
Yep.
We're going to talk about Craft in the Real World by Matthew Salisis.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop by Felicia Rose Chavez. And I mean, what's interesting about our title of this episode is, I learned so much by reading these books. I have loved it and been just immersed in it and mind sort of blown by it. But just the basic reality that you see the world how you are. You see the world from where you sit or stand or live. And that just happens to be where you and I see the world from, as we are white. So it is appropriate to title it that. But
and most of the other books we have talked about, although not all, have been written by white people. Many of them, especially the further back you go, the more likely it's going to be white men on writing about white men. It's all Philip Roth, all the Philip Roths all the way down. So, and I don't know, 20 years ago, would we have even noticed?
Right. Maybe? Maybe not. And one of the reasons I really liked immersing myself, these books are all pretty new, really new, actually, in the case of these two, the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop and Craft in the Real World.
Yeah, Writing the Other's actually been around for quite a while.
Yeah, it has been. I only became aware of it recently, but Nisi Shawl and Cynthia Ward have a course on Writing the Other. They have a lot of resources, so it has been around. But the other two have come up recently, and all of them come into my orbit of knowing recently. And it's one thing that just must be said is I think, like many people, I like to think that I am inclusive and anti-racist in all ways, and I have learned that there is always a massively big way to go and always much more to do and learn. And these books were a reminder of that for me.
Well, that is actually a great way to get into Writing the Other, because one of the things that I really adored about this book is that it gives you permission to learn and to change and to evolve. And the two women writing it, one of them is white and one of them is black, and they both discuss times that they have seen things from their perspective and viewed them as normal, that when their attention was drawn to it, they realized that only someone in their position would see it that way. And I appreciated that they both did that,
Yeah.
and that they both talked about their evolution.
The tone of this book, Writing the Other, is fabulous. Like you say, it's very welcoming. It's very growth mindset oriented, and a lot of very practical steps and exercises you can do, especially when you're building character, when you're actually thinking about your character and how they're going to see the world and how they're going to go through the world.
I was hoping to find it, the part where one of them, I think she'd written about someone from, I was hoping to find it, but
watching writers write and watching writers go through writing books, kind of the same
just
thing.
Sit here quietly while I reread this very short, and it is very short, but it is deeply like chock full of stuff, right?
There is nothing extraneous in here. Well, and the most important part of this book in my mind is on page 5, where they introduce a concept that they have invented, a categorization system called ROARS, I guess is how you would say it. It's ROAARS, which stands for race, orientation, ability, age, religion, and sex. So this acronym is one that you use to learn about how you characterize people, what you include and what you omit, and they use that throughout the book as a measure.
Well, and it's kind of neat and definitely useful, because at the moment, the conversation is really centered around BIPOC writers and BIPOC characters, and absolutely, more better, please now. My problem too. But adding this, the fact that they wrote this a while ago and that they took it from the perspective of race, orientation, ability, age, religion, and sex. It can change the way that you think about it, because, you're not an old person, but you will be.
Yeah.
So, on the other hand, you're not a Black person and you will never be. Ditto. But it gives you, I think it gives us a different way in to thinking about whether or not we can try to be in these other perspectives. And of course, I mean, that is a super delicate topic, right? I wouldn't, you don't want to read a book by me about, the experiences of a young Black man growing up on a Native American reservation.
Well, what's interesting,
but I could have a character like that, which is a different question. I mean, you wouldn't, I wouldn't want to write a first person tale that was about his experience, but I could, he could be my detective if I wrote detective stories. He could discover the body if I wrote detective stories. He can be a boyfriend, he can be a friend, but not and the other cool thing about this is that they also try to talk about, okay, well, don't just go, okay, well, here's a minor character. I'll make it, I'll give
one of those ROARS characteristics just so that I have it in there.
Yeah. So, they really work on that line as well. And
I mean, the thing I like best about this book is that as a book coach, I cannot live in a world in which people are only allowed to write about what they know. I don't think as readers we want to live in that world either, because that's a weird world. I mean, somebody could write that dystopian novel maybe where you're only allowed to to know your own perspective or write your own perspective, that all we would have then is either memoir or not memoir like novels. And I don't want to live in that world. I want to live in the world where writers can imagine and they can, build new worlds and put themselves in new perspectives and places. And I think what I really liked about this book is I think they have that same assumption. They're not saying you can't do this or that. They're saying if you do this, here's how to do it well, here's how to do it sensitively, here's how to do it better, here's how perhaps the place where you rub up against not doing it as you just said, KJ. And but that there's an inclusivity in their writing about inclusivity.
Yeah, there really is. And part of that, I think, comes from their way of encouraging us to approach considering other perspectives, which, they give you all these lovely lists of, things where you might be different from others in a way that society would see. So, ability, race, religion, which you can't necessarily see, but sometimes you can, depending on how people observe it, age, that sort of thing. But then they're like, left-handed, plays the bassoon, obsessed with rap music. Like they sort of, their list is better than what I just gave. Let's child support payment evader, narcissist,
Right.
Someone who dwells in a rural area. Hello, person who frequently changes hair color. Part-time student, insomniac. So I think that they very clearly make the point that just because you're left-handed, that doesn't mean you can relate to someone who's been discriminated against by their skin color their whole life, but it gives you a way into thinking about that character, not just as like a little cardboard cutout that you stuff into your book as, as the best friend of the detective, but someone with a perspective that simply differs in that way, but not in every way, from yours. And all your characters presumably have
Well,
perspectives that differ.
that's exactly right. I mean, the title of this book, Writing the Other, really applies to anybody other than your own self,
Yeah.
anybody other than your own, how you
I mean,
see
they
your.
didn't put gender in there, but you could. And sometimes I would like to say, why no, Philip Roth, you cannot write anymore. I'm sorry. You really mean, but he's dead, right? That's cool. Philip Roth can't write any more female characters. That'd be fine. But it's not like I'm saying no male writer can write male character or female characters, or no female writer
Right,
can
we
write
wouldn't
male
want to
characters. That
read
would be
them.
terrible.
Yeah, we wouldn't
Although
want that.
sometimes you do read them and you're like, oh, dude, yeah, women, that's not really how they feel about your penis. I'm sorry. But
Well,
okay.
I think this book would help with all of that for all people in all ways. It's fabulous, and they call it a practical approach, very
Yep.
practical. So on
Yes.
the other kind of spectrum of books that get at some of these ideas, Craft in the Real World, the subtitles Rethinking Fiction Writing and Workshopping, and this book is really very much about the formal workshop, the formal writing workshop that one has when one gets an MFA at a accredited institution.
Yeah. Or I would say I have not, my copy of the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop didn't turn up for some reason. I've sort of mentally, now I think I know where it is. So I'm going to have it, but I suspect that this book falls sort of in between writing the other and the workshop one, in that this is sort of half about just writing and half about conducting a workshop. But even the part that is about writing is very much from the perspective of those who are educated at, or will be educated in, a traditional MFA program, which is not an experience either of us have had, right?
That's right. And
Yeah.
what's interesting is this book makes me really happy that I have not had that experience.
Yeah.
It's a scathing critique of that world that he comes from, and that.
Well, and yet it is deeply soaked in the world. I sometimes felt excluded from this book because I don't think in these words. Like
Yeah.
I don't think in these terms. I didn't yeah, sometimes I didn't quite know how to
Yeah, I mean, he's
interpret it.
extremely smart, and his learnedness is very much on display, but you're right, it's this particular
It's
perspective.
it's a, it's an anti-writing workshop book written very much in the vein of and by someone who was educated by these writing workshops. It's kind of funny. I would like to see what he would write. He's a fairly young guy, right? I think
Well,
so.
yeah, and he's
20
talking.
years from now, he should redo this and it'll be totally different.
Yeah, and you're right. He's writing about breaking the model of the writing workshop within the writing workshop,
Yeah.
like, which is great
Yep.
for that thing. But it felt heavy to me. It
Yeah.
felt heavy, and not heavy like, okay, these are some
This is
tough,
important.
or
Right.
but heavy, burdensome as a read, I guess.
Well, and it really does assume a pretty that it assumes that you are in possession of the literary canon of which um he's urging us to diverge from in MFA, but it definitely assumes a knowledge of it. I don't think he wants to. Like on this is not this is not like the anti Matthew Salasis writing workshop. It's just it's funny how much he's been affected by the program that he was in, and how as someone who hasn't been in one, it was kind of hard to
Yeah, no, I think it's a really
absorb.
interesting point. And I mean, his title, Craft in the Real World, is he's trying to yank the idea of craft out of this format that he is very steeped in. And but I mean,
But if
to
you write literary fiction, whether you've been in an MFA program or not, I do think that this is probably this is a great place to go, just because he's not just he's really talking about different literary forms that come from different literary traditions, which is super interesting and probably more applicable to the writer of literary fiction who's maybe exploring and experimenting a little bit more than the writer of genre fiction or simply, whatever you want to call contemporary popular fiction.
right. And the lessons, I mean, on the positive side, I this book made me think about some things I had never thought about. And it made me question some things I had never questioned. And among those things are, um, first of all, I had no idea that the very tradition of the writing workshop, or at
Me
least
neither.
the Iowa writing workshop, came out of this anti-communist indoctrination, spreading the word.
It's practically the MAGA writing workshop.
I mean, I was just shocked that I had never thought about that I'd never thought, where did it come from? Why did it start? Why was it perpetuated by, famous white writer men for so long? And I never thought about that. Not ever. And
Mm-mm.
also, uh, just really had never thought about what I mean, I guess this is a point in the program where I should say that there was a point in my life as a young English major in college where I thought that I was going to go in the direction of the institutional MFA English degree, PhD, I thought the academic path. I thought that was the only path that or the most logical or sensible path to go on. And I took in my life one writing workshop with famous writer Marilyn Robeson, who was a visiting professor at Amherst College, where I was visiting for a year. And I took a workshop with her, and I thought she was brilliant. And I thought the whole thing was absolutely terrifying. I hated it, and I felt like I had this fragile thing, which at the time I thought of as my voice. I believed in it, and I was confident in it, and I knew that I wanted to be a writer, and I felt that that entire environment was going to crush it. I felt that. I remember very clearly feeling that. And in this book, he really talks about that from the perspective of anyone who is other than white male. So including women and including all other kinds and types of people.
Well, and I think you have to say white cis-abled male, because
Yeah.
you're just as othered if you're if you have different sexual orientation or gender presentation, or if you're differently abled, which was, I might add, something I really adored about writing The Other, is that they included that as both a perspective of value and also as a reminder of a kind of person that moves around in the world that better be moving around in yours.
Yeah. And it's interesting because my reaction to my one writer's workshop was, it was a woman writer. And yet I still felt that kind of systemic, I had a fear of the process of the whole thing. It felt scary to me. And one thing I really liked about Matthew Salisi's book is he showed really the bravery of people who have gone through those programs, as he did when they were a person of color or other in some way, and how hard that must have been. And putting myself in that, understanding that and seeing that and learning about that was really interesting. Just taking the time to really think about that. And and I appreciated that about him, and his very rigorous scholarship around it. Not just like, here's what I felt or here's what I saw, but
no, I mean, I often have a chip on my shoulder about this stuff because this did not feel like a world that was available to me growing up, and I mostly kind of wish it had been. So the easiest way to express that is to say it's all stupid.
Oh, interesting. So what do you mean by that? That you just the whole world of like.
So I grew up in Kansas. I went to public schools that were not very impressive, not at all impressive at the time, and they may be fine now. I had some very excellent English teachers, but the honest truth about the vast majority of my education is the fact that I could write a paper that included sentences that all had proper grammatical structure and the words were spelled correctly was enough. Like that was all I had to be able to do. And that was somewhat true of my college education as well, with some standout exceptions. And I just wasn't raised in a family where literary aspirations were legitimate. So I needed to go work for a living. So actually, when I was coming out of college, one of my professors offered to introduce me to someone at the New Yorker. This is a story I never tell because I'm so embarrassed by it. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't, because they're not going to, I have to go get my law degree and earn a living. I can't go to New York and take an internship at a magazine that's not going to pay.
Wow.
Come on. My whole life could be different, right? I could have gone to the Iowa Writers Workshop. I could be, and do I think, yeah, that's like my only regret.
That's so interesting.
But my father's head would have totally exploded. I mean, and other people have more guts than me and would have defied their family, but I was not that person.
Yeah, I mean, this is a book, Craft in the Railroad is a book about the academy. It is about going to study at the academy, the roots of the academy in terms of writing, how it treats writers. One thing that I didn't know, I had sort of heard this, but I didn't really understand it. And the author makes you really understand it, is this practice of silencing the writer in the workshop. The practice is that you present your work and everyone else critiques it and you just sit there. You're not allowed to defend it. And I get that on the one hand, because I often, a funny thing happens sometimes when I edit. a writer's pages, and I ask, well, why? I don't get this, or this doesn't make sense, and they'll explain it in the comment to me, like, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's not.
As someone who's been edited by you, I've had that urge but resisted it, because that is not the point.
The point is to fix it in the words, because guess what? You're not going to be there.
It's not that, when I say I don't think that I already know that she went to graduate school. The answer is not, yes, you do. It was on page 12. The answer is, okay, I'll make that more clear.
I would like to hope that that's where the impulse comes in the writing workshop, that practice of not defending the work, but the institutionalization of silencing the writer and silencing the voice. And I mean, it's harrowing, some of the things he describes.
Yeah. And the idea of it happening, I mean, just to put it in a way that you and I could think about it, but imagine yourself in a room with all men, and you've written a book about, or a story about rape, just to make it as intense as possible, and now you have to sit there silently while they critique it. Oh no.
Right.
And that must have happened to people.
Well, and he talks about how the critiques were, well, I went to Korea once, and that's not the way Korean people.
Oh, that was the best part about this, or one of them to me, was how, when he was talking about how if you're writing about Korea, there's the way a white person sees Korea, and there's the way a Korean person sees Korea. So, your white editor may say, well, it would be a really important detail to me that people were eating their spicy food on the subway and I could smell it. But to a Korean, that's totally normal, unless like you spill it all over the floor of the subway. And I don't remember, that's not the exact detail, but
it was the idea of
the different ways of experiencing the place. And so if you're writing for a solely white audience, then yeah, those are the details that you want to bring out. But if you're not, and not everyone is, well, no one is really, but even if you're writing, in that case, it was more, if you're writing for an American audience, you do one thing. But if you're writing for a Korean American audience and an American audience, you do it a little bit differently. I'll bet that new memoir, Crying in H Mart, I haven't read it yet, but I'll bet that handles exactly that really well. Like the details that speak to the Korean Americans versus the details that speak to the non-Korean Americans that also want to experience the story.
Well, and I think that is what the basic problem with the publishing industry is and has been, that it centers a white audience and a white assuming audience and a white author, and also male, and all of those things, and that that's what, as an industry, we need to change, and as the institution that is part of that. I guess the MFA academic institution is not really part of the publishing industry, but
it's part of the publishing industrial complex, right?
Yes. And the argument for that it needs to change and how it needs to change is very powerfully put in here. So I know you haven't read this one, but I do want to bring this one up. The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop: How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom, as one that I would say is in the middle, and super strangely enough also critiques the Iowa Writing Workshop. But Felicia Rose Chavez, the author, this is a book about teaching writing. It is a book about the classroom, but it is not just about the academy. I think it could be really helpful for all editors, certainly for all book coaches. I will be recommending all of the book coaches in Author Accelerator's training program to read this. I think it could help if you're teaching middle school English, or fourth grade English, or college, courses. So it's a book about teaching writing, but not so much centered in the tradition. I guess it's the workshop tradition. And Chavez does an exceptionally beautiful job of showing how she has changed the teaching of writing process to be more inclusive. So she's talking about her own process of yanking it out of that old tradition, but she's teaching a new way, and it's a very embodied approach. It feels very female to me, that her approach. It's really beautiful, and just her whole stance. She's a powerful writer and has a powerful message. And she's the type of person that you get the feeling that you don't want to cross her. Like, you would not want to cross her anywhere over anything, because, well, the sense that I get is she knows herself so well, and she has taught herself to be so articulate about her beliefs that I feel like I would be blah, 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 around whatever the thing is. So I just really enjoyed this very powerfully written book. And her point is that to know yourself and be yourself and write yourself, not just write your story. That's not what she means, but own where you come from as a writer, and own what you're trying to do as a writer, and think about those things before you want to write. And to me, that's the whole stinking game. And I just this book really captured me in a profound way. And I'm actually not even finished with it. I'm only about 2/3 of the way from it, but it's just it's one of those books I was underlying so much and dog-earing so much, and it's like, oh, just forget it. The whole thing is just read this book. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And it is less academic than Matthew Salisi's, for sure. Writing the Other, I think, is very practical book for writers.
Yeah. Some stuff we didn't say about that one is it's super, like, one thing I thought was really cool about it, that's not true of, I think, any other book we've talked to, is that it's leans heavily on the sci-fi and fantasy genre.
Yeah.
Both for examples and for sort of ways of talking about this. So A, if that's your genre, great. But B, even if it's not, it's just a different way of thinking about it, which is kind of fun. And they also talk about just like populating a world with lots of different people, whether it is the actual world or Disney World, different kinds of people. I appreciated that a lot.
They talk about creatures too.
Yeah.
Like
so who's thought about that? I mean, who's defending the aliens?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say that if you were a writer writing the other, you absolutely should have on your bookshelf. And I have, since I read it, begun to prescribe it to various of my clients and students, for anybody who's writing about anything. And in this climate, a lot of people are really afraid to write the other. They're really afraid of crossing a boundary. I think
and with some good reason. In YA in particular, and in other genres as well, there have been some big outcries over what may or may not have, over both mistakes and oversights, and terrible choices, and possibly intentional cultural appropriation. So you could see, I could definitely see that that fear, but that fear shouldn't make you, as someone in this, as an example in this, is populate your version of Disney World with only white people with Anglo-Saxon last names.
Right. And the risk of writing anything is that you're going to get things, I'm using air quotes, wrong, or you're going to offend someone, which could be your mother, or it could be,
almost certainly will be,
a whole class of people. Like, there is a risk inherent in doing anything that is for the public eye, and writers have to wrestle with that. That is just the truth of it. So, if you're writing anything, I think this book is incredibly important. And then I would say, if you're teaching anybody to write, or guiding them in any way, shape, or form, this book is helpful in that it helps you see just by the questions that you ask and the way you frame them, and how you help a person, that you could be probably more inclusive than you are being. Like I said at the start of this, I always thought that I was one way, and just more and more I've realized that it's a process, it's a
Yep.
practice,
Nope.
it's an ongoing
It's a
thing.
series of endless assumptions that you don't realize you're making until you realize you're making them.
That's right. And as a teacher of people who write this, I think it's going to become one of the most important books to me. So,
And if you are thinking about an MFA, or you have an MFA and feel somewhat frozen by what you learned there, or you're struggling within one, this is really gonna, I think, help you find your way.
well, we probably should come to the end of this particular
Extra
topic.
long episode, but extra good topic.
Yeah.
And we won't do our 5 things we loved about them, because, or do you have?
No, I think we did that. And I think,
Yeah.
there's no, like I said, there's no
We're
single
not gonna
point.
argue.
These are just,
These are just good.
yeah, they're just good. We all have a lot to learn, and these are just good.
And again, 20 years from now, when we have a stack this high of these, then we'll come back and tell you which ones are our favorite, and we'll argue about them.
That's a fair point.
It's a plan.
So join us for our next episode, where we're going to talk about what to read when you need reminding of why you're doing this.
Yeah, I can't wait. That's going to be a good one. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening. As always, you can find #AmWriting on Facebook, in the #AmWriting Facebook group. You can get in touch with us by visiting our website, #amwriting.com. No, #amwritingpodcast.com. Sorry. #amwritingpodcast.com. You can get in touch with us there. You can sign up for our weekly emails there. You can support the podcast there. And if you are watching on YouTube, thanks. If you're not, you can watch this on YouTube. And if you are, just know that if you'd rather have these in podcast form in your car, they're available that way too. We don't suggest watching them on YouTube that way. That would be terrible, terrible idea. All right. Hey, do you want to take us out with the slogan this week, Jenny?
I don't know the slogan.
No, then I'm going to do it. As we always say, keep your butt in the chair and your head in the game.